Good afternoon and welcome to the City of Helena City Commission meeting. This meeting is called to order. Welcome and thank you for participating in the City of Helena City Commission meeting. We are pleased to be able to provide this alternative meeting format in the city's effort to broaden public participation. Please be patient as we may experience technical difficulties during the meeting. We welcome your public commentary during the meeting. Please read the following tips and guidelines for the app usage and your participation. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll, please?
City Attorney Joden.
Here.
City Manager Harlow Shulk.
Here.
Commissioner Halliday. Commissioner Dean.
Here.
Commissioner Logan.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, I'll call for Commissioner O'Loughlin. I believe she was anticipating she might be a few minutes late.
That is correct.
And Mayor Collins.
Here. Thank you. Any comments or discussion from the commission?
Mayor?
Yes, Commissioner Logan.
Question possibly for the manager, if I may. Do we have on a future, an agenda in the near future, any kind of update from Civic Center Steering Committee?
Commissioner Logan, Commission, Mayor, I do not have on the list an update, but can certainly add one if you would like. And if just to clarify, it's an update on the status of the Civic Center activities, the commission activities.
I would be interested just in getting an update on the progress of the steering committee.
Great. Okay, I will add it to future agenda.
And I can just provide the committee's met every month since we passed the resolution in December. I think it's fully staffed at this point, or fully membered. The body kind of broke out with some different tasks. There was a presentation from two members, Alan Scott and Ms. Opitz from the TBID, regarding potential future approaches to the shape of the Civic Center or who's running it. The sort of exploring management and other options that we put into the resolution. And then I believe, from what I understand, the body's guidance was to have some further discussion and consider a vote on advising the commission on the way to go, and providing, they had some ideas then on board structure and composition based on that information and feedback provided by the presenting parties at the last meeting. I think the board has extended its meetings to an hour and a half on the fourth Thursday of each month in order to accomplish all the goals that the three of us, at least, who voted for the resolution, gave them back in December.
Commissioner Logan, does that satisfy your request?
Thanks, Commissioner Halliday. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'd still be interested in having a little bit more detail at a future admin meeting, if possible.
Okay. Well, then I'd recommend too, just because of what they're doing, we can invite them. We gave them a deadline of April, and I know they are working extremely hard to get that April deadline. And then we gave them an August deadline as well. So I think the same way we've asked them for those updates, but I would remind us that we do have that deadline in place for them right now, where they're going to have to come in and provide us that. So we could ask beforehand and have a meeting on it. But they are anticipating providing information based on the timeline we gave them.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Halliday. Any other discussion or comments from the commission?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner Dean.
I was just hoping we'd start the meeting and wishing everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you.
For me, Mr. Mayor, today, so we got a letter last week regarding the sort of Helena Regional Sports Activity Center, etc. I had asked that we pull that back and have a little bit more discussion on it. I know I missed a little bit. I don't think I missed anything in the meetings that I missed between the commission meeting and admin meeting. I know I missed a little bit of the city county meeting where we discussed this. But when I read through the content of it, there were substantive pieces that I was just a little concerned that I had not heard consensus on us kind of giving all of those. I'd heard consensus on different pieces of those in different manners, but I hadn't heard us say sort of that is our position as a united commission, or at least 3 out of 5. So I thought, one, I had a little concern about us just releasing that letter without having some more substantive conversation. The other was just that it would be my recommendation in these non-time sensitive communications that we give a little bit of time at these admin meetings at a minimum to see the letter and just sort of thumbs up, thumbs down our respective support for it. Anyway, just because I sent that letter on to the HRSA folks and said, just so you know, we're considering this, the potential signature on it, because I thought it's something they might want to weigh in part because when I read it, the first thought that came to my mind was if I was trying to fundraise for this sports center, I would not want the city commission writing this letter. This is not something I would want to show to a potential donor because I thought some of the content of it indicates that the city's not in support. So I just thought we would certainly, in that kind of case, want to have those parties have an opportunity to say, hey, maybe we don't even want that letter from you guys if you think that's support. So 2 parts. One, I apologize that I suggested we pull that back. And 2, I just think we ought to probably be putting these on meetings. Otherwise, we're kind of voting on what appeared to be a little bit of substantive direction through a letter communication. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments or discussion from the commission? Thank you. Recommendations from Helena Citizens Council. Do we have Mr. Andrews on the line? Or Ms. Perry or Mr. Pacini?
Mayor Collins, city commissioners and city manager.
You are muted, Mr. Andrews. Andrew.
So can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Mayor Collins, city commissioners and city managers Harlow Schall. The Helena Citizens Council would like to bring an advisement to you today regarding signage and information at Capital Transit bus stops. We've been working with a few concerned citizens that have made some recommendations, and we had discussion and voted on making this a formal recommendation for your consideration. We believe that Capital Transit has a strong digital presence in Helena, but is lacking in information and signage at its bus stops. And the recommendations that we're going to make are to help citizens and visitors that don't have available access to digital means and are looking for more visual presentations for public transit in Helena. Most of the suggestions are pretty simple. One of them was the Capital Transit large T, which is the standard transit system logo, is not really recognizable by most people. So we're going to suggest a small sign underneath the large T that denotes it as a bus stop. And we're also asking that all stops, or at least the primary stops, have route maps, fares, and schedules that, along with destinations for specific routes, be made available at these stops. We're also asking that Capital Transit consider additional stops on residential streets such as Helena Avenue, 6th Avenue, and Winnie. Most of this is pretty simple with not much in the way of monetary considerations to be accomplished, but I think it would help both citizens and visitors realize that Helena does have a public transit system and would maximize usage of Capital Transit buses. So that's all I have. I think there were a couple of people that would like to add public comments, if that's possible.
Go ahead, Mr. Pacini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and commissioners. And I appreciate this time to address you on this matter from the perspective of a private citizen. I've lived in Helena since 1974, and I have not used the public bus system much. It's not because I don't like the bus system. I think we have a great bus system. The buses are comfortable. Whenever I've been in them, they're clean. Drivers are friendly. And I think the route that is the blue and the red routes that have been laid out are reasonable. What I'm concerned about is nobody knows how to use the system unless you are committed to spending a considerable amount of time researching it before you start looking for a bus stop. Right now, after more than 45 years of living in Helena, in the downtown area of Helena, I know of 3 bus stops in the downtown area. If I left the downtown area, like I could find a bus stop and probably get to the Capitol or the hospital or something like that. Or even out on Euclid somewhere. But I don't know where to find a bus stop to get back unless it's the same place they let me off, and it's not always. So if I don't know how to use our bus system, I think there's probably a lot of other city residents who don't know how to use it. And what worries me more is there's probably very few visitors and tourists that know how to use it. And that is one of the ideas of having a public transportation system, is the economy, the economy of it, the money that the tourists will spend downtown or in other shops and at the State Museum. And so I really think we need to make it a little easier for people to figure out where to catch a bus, how much it's going to cost, where that bus is going to go, what time is it going to be at your bus stop. And if you go to any large city in the United States or in Europe, they all have that information posted at every bus stop. So I think even though we have a good system, we don't have a good means of communicating that system to people. So I would really like to see that improve, because I'd like to use a bus stop. I'd like to use a bus system more than I have been. And I would like to see us keep the bus system for those who don't have cars and for tourists and visitors. John Andrew did a nice job of summarizing it. I would like to just reiterate there are actually 6 points to my recommendation to the HCC and what we're transmitting to you. One, and John hit most of those. The first one are the signs. The big red T is a nice piece of art. It looks nice, but a visitor, a tourist, many Helena residents, Valley residents really don't know what that T stands for. If we could just put a small sign below, you could attach it right below that sign that has 2 words on it, bus stop. It would orient people to what that sign means. 2, near that sign or on the same signpost, we should have a route map so that you can look on it with a very simple map of the city and get an idea of what part of town the route that you happen to be standing on would take you to, excuse me. Also, that map should show you bus stops. That's point number 3. You should be able to figure out where bus stops are other than the one you're standing in. There should be a time schedule. When can you expect that bus to arrive at the bus stop that you're standing at? None of that is available except on, you can get the city map app, Shout, I can't think of the full name, Shout something, but tourists aren't likely to take the time to do that. And residents, it's easier just jump in your car and go and go. Okay, point number 5. How about the cost? And not only the cost, but can you use a credit card? Do you need to have cash? Do you need to have the exact change? That needs to be there to make it convenient. And then the last thing is that there are stops at downtown, there's stops at the hospital, the major points of interest, there are stops. There are no stops, or very few stops, I should say. No stops that I know of in residential areas. That's like the bus system is saying, well, we don't expect residents to use the bus. Well, maybe some of us want to use the bus. We should have some stops in residential areas. That's really it. And I really hope that you can, I don't know what it takes, I suppose, make sure that there's money in the capital city transit budget for them to post these signs. In the large scheme of things, it can't be all that expensive. I appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pacini. Ms. Berry? Ms. Berry?
Yes, I just got unmuted. Thank you very much. Thanks to John and to Paul, Mr. Mayor and commissioners. John did a really good job of researching and writing our recommendation, but this is kind of exciting because this is an example where a citizen of one of our districts actually approached a member of the Helena Citizens Council and asked them to help them out, which is basically what we're here for. So this is good. We're real pleased with this. I hope you decide that this is a good recommendation that Paul and John are asking for. And I hope you decide that it's going to pay for itself in increased ridership, which seems to be a perennial problem with capital transit. Right now, all that I and the rest of the budget committee can think about is Helena's budget. And I've made a rough draft of what our final report on the budget is going to look like. And as we attend the work sessions in April, I'm going to be able to fill that rough draft in. And I'm hoping one entry that I'll be able to put in there is that the commission decided to accept our recommendation and improve the signage at the bus stops to make it easier for prospective riders to figure out how to take the bus to get where they're trying to go. This should increase ridership and it should help Helena save some money on that bus. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. All right, what's the will and pleasure of the commission? Do we have any comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor, I do have one question, I think probably for Director Kanapke or Manager Hello-Schalk.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Dane.
I'm just curious, is there money that's available within the budget right now that could help with this, or is this something that we need to, make sure that we include it as a line item in our upcoming budget discussions?
Mayor, commissioners, I would have to double check the budget. and review the costs. We saw these recommendations in the packet, but haven't had a chance to really dive down in to see what the cost impacts would be. As far as expanding the service, when the fixed routes were created, the commission at that time wanted 2 specific routes, and to have those routes to be basically running 30 minutes or less. So that's why there's minimal stops along these routes to certain places. That's part of the reason why we're going to be bringing forward a discussion to the commission about possible variants of the service that transit provides. We do recognize that we don't reach some of the areas in Helena with the fixed route system, and there's some models out there that may help us reach a greater population of Helena with minimal impacts to our budget, say adding additional drivers or vehicles. But that needs to be evaluated and discussed with the commission to see if that's the kind of the direction that you would like transit to move. But I'd be happy to get back an estimate of what these signs would cost. One caution that I do see on this, if we're providing, there's a lot of signage that has to be up above the ground or in some other location because of ADA requirements. But if we're providing, say, paper rate schedules and such, those typically become objects of other pleasures other than the desired purchase. But if we were to put them in, say, sign everything, that could get expensive. We are looking at this year of a new mobile app, a new scheduling software that does account for a lot of the questions. It obviously doesn't account for somebody that just doesn't have the knowledge of our bus system or access to a smartphone or a computer, but it does address those other portions of the population. We're continuing to try to serve as many people as possible. But I'll get back to you with a cost estimate on these recommendations and a possible implementation here to the manager here in the next week or so.
Thank you, Mr. Konopke. As for one, I think those recommendations seem harmless, but we will still have to, I still think we'll have to research and go through the cost and what it will be, because the recommendations from HCC right now, awesome recommendations, because those are things that we need to get done. So, but I would advise the city manager to look into it fully, look into everything, how we can accomplish this. And then we'll be able to decide what we tell HCC, what the decision will be for HCC, because if we don't know what's ahead, we can't just say we're going to be yay or nay. But I think these are recommendations that we should be able to accomplish. Do we have any other comments?
Mayor, I have a comment and then a question, I think probably for Mr. Leland.
Go ahead, Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Great. So just a comment. I think these recommendations are great. I've been talking with Director Konopke and his staff about the concept of adding additional stops. It's one of those self-fulfilling prophecies. I think if you ultimately are not going to have stops and then turn around and say, well, the bus system isn't well utilized. But the reality is, if you're not going to the hospital or to one specific spot, downtown, there's really nowhere to get on or off the bus. And so I think it's a great idea. And I would love to see the commission give direction, specific direction to Director Konopky to scope the potential of building out, several additional stops on each route. The other alternative, and this is what Great Falls does, and they've done it for a very long time. They have a very solid public transit system in Great Falls, and you can essentially get on the bus anywhere on the route. And it doesn't necessarily slow down the operation. They're not stopping, at each block and waiting for individuals, but you merely flag down the bus and you can get on the bus. I question the extent to which that would slow things down to a level that just makes it inoperable. And perhaps we want to reach out to Great Falls Transit and see how they've done theirs. So I think the first bullet seemed very straightforward and common sense ideas that is just a matter of marketing the transit system. I think the recommendation of adding more stops is a substantive one that I would fully support. And I think it would be great for us to ask the staff to come back in, say, a month with a recommendation of how to do that. So
Right.
that would be a question I'd ask to the commission. And then I have a question for Mr. Leland.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
So, and Mr. Leland, Director Leland, if this is better directed to somebody else, I know that you've been working on the Rodney Street project for a long time now. Can you remind me, I know there were some discussions with the adjacent property owners in installing bus stops on both sides of the street. And my understanding is that, there is some interest in helping to support that by the adjacent property owners. Is that built into our phase 1 plan at this point for Rodney Street?
Mayor, Commissioner, we just had a meeting with them today. I can't remember the exact name. I think it's Rodney, or it is Rodney Group that is out there. They are looking to put a bus stop on each side of Rodney Street that at the B&B Market, and then subsequently across the way. And Mr. Konopky, or Director Konopky, might be able to fill in too. And then they're looking at supporting it and putting up some art. Some of the concerns is just coming up with an idea of, are we going to continue to have a fixed bus system, or are we going to do dialed ride on call? And those were just some of the conversations that we did have with that, but we are still working with them and then figuring out how and what it'll be to accommodate them in our existing plans. We're looking at lights. They're looking there and what it would be to have, say, Conduit or Northwestern Energy put it in. So we're still in the phases of working with them and seeing what the budget impact would be to that. And then Director Konopky, I think, has some ideas to fill in.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Loughlin and Director Leland.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
Mayor and Commissioners, there's an existing bus stops on Rodney at this point. The discussion is putting in bus shelters with the project to basically enhance those existing bus stops. So those are the conversations we've had, and Director Leland, summarized that meeting good. There's just some questions that we have to work through with that. I think Rodney it's Rodney. I can't remember the name of the group either, but so we're continuing to work there, but there are existing bus stops there. It's just not the bus shelters.
Thank you, Mayor and Director Konopky. That I meant bus shelter, so thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments?
Mayor?
Go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
Thank you. Just to let you know, I appreciate the work that the folks from HCC put into getting this feedback to us, and I'm looking forward to hearing back from staff about how we can make these happen if possible.
You bet. Thank you. Any other comments? So, Madam Hollishock, would you and your staff please look into this? And I'm sure some of them can be accomplished right now. Some of the recommendations could be accomplished right now, but on the larger scale, would you please look into that and get back to us no later than a month?
Yes, Mayor, Commission, I've added it to the May 12th administrative meeting along with the Civic Center Steering Committee update.
Thank you. City Manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. May 12th, just to clarify, I know you said no further out than May, than a month. I just wanted to make sure and clarify that that's as quick as I can get a turn with the 2 commission meetings, but I will move it up even further to the 28th of May, the Transportation Systems update. Just to clarify that. And as far as the update, thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. Happy St. Patrick's Day. And I really appreciated seeing the mayor's speech today and with the city or the county commission as well in raising the Irish flag today. So first up on the items from me is the report to you all in response to questions asked and further data and information specific to fire department response in connection to the type of information that had been presented by Chief Wood in the 2 conversations brought before the commission. And so there's a summary memorandum provided that goes into further detail on questions asked by you all either during the meeting or after via email, and are further detailed as well, including an anticipated work plan as well as who the work lead would be, specifics around turnout times and mileage, population, comparisons, and then last, further incorporation of the bullets from the previous study. So my hope is that there's greater clarification around the need for the work that we're discussing. And just to clarify again, the work that we're discussing is 2 parts. The first is really an evaluation and an update of the current service levels. And just in looking on that page 2 of the memorandum, which is an evaluation of current services, the lead would be Chief Wood. And we would bring recommendations to you all, anticipated by March 1. It's a year's worth of work. And we would hire a consultant to work with stakeholders and revise the 2006 and 2008 studies to include the urban wildland interface service needs, as well as interlocal agreements, any current needs, recommended improvements, and offer funding options to include potential establishment, or to include the establishment of a 3rd station on the north side of the city. And then as well, the stakeholders were identified. And then the second conversation is a community planning conversation led by Director Hogan. And by April 1, seek joint standards and adoption through the joint city-county planning commission, and even presentations anticipated in front of their zoning and planning subcommittee that they've created to address growth, as well as other primary planning and community issues that address emergency connections or other emergent services expected to be provided by the city due to development, including annexation requests. And again, emergency response services includes both police, fire, water, wastewater, and transportation. I hope that helps. And certainly if you have more questions or data that you would like in movement forward on those 2 paths, please let me know. So far, though, we do have, I believe, and have received consensus to move forward with the stakeholder engagement to study, but I have not received confirmation and movement forward and consensus from the commission on the community planning piece. So I'm hoping to get that tonight if I can.
Thank you, Madam Hollishock. Commissioner Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I be in support of that community planning discussion. One thing that part of the memo prompted for me was, I know we've talked about this in other pieces when we talk about 911 response anyway, but I know I'll be really interested, and I think it's worth taking a good look at our data systems and how we, not just how we collect it, but how we collect it across emergency services, because I do think that this is a place over the last year where we've consistently, wanted good data, and I think staff has wanted to be able to provide it, but don't necessarily have the tools to provide that. And so I do think that having an opportunity to really get clear on what type of data we need and how it needs to be collected, and how those systems will talk to each other is an important piece. And so I hope that will be part of that discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments from the commission? Any public comments?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I do have one written public comment. I'll read aloud if you'd like.
Yes, please.
From Nate Weisenberger. No, never mind. I don't believe it was related to this topic. I'm sorry. This is more logistics. I'll go ahead and give him his mic. Give me just a moment.
Go ahead, Nate. You have the floor.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I had audio when
Yes.
it's my turn to speak. So as long as you can hear me, that's great. Thank you.
Loud and clear.
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
if possible, I'd just like to give some feedback to the manager relative to both pieces of the community discussion. I'm supportive of them. I'm particularly interested in the fire side on the wellland urban interface discussions. I think that's a really important need that Helena has relative to the fire service, and very supportive of that. And in terms of community planning, very supportive of that as well. So
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other public comments or comments from the commission? As well, I'm also in support of both of those ideas, Madam Manager. Is your presentation done?
Sorry. Yes, thank you, Mayor. On that item, it is. The next
Okay.
item, the next item up under the city manager's report is the electioneering and campaign advocacy. This came up in relationship to the YMCA letter, and in response, as I acknowledged to the commission, that letter should not have been brought out, and it was premature. So my apologies. The staff have, and I will bring it into the commission for a future meeting, and that would be on the, please added it to another admin meeting on April 5th. It actually is a full city commission meeting so that we have enough opportunity as well and public notice so that the YMCA and their regional partners can be a part of that conversation as well. So the next item, though, is the electioneering and campaigning advocacy. This is a subject that came up as part of the letter, and want to just quickly turn it over to Thomas if you have any questions based on the white paper that he provided, as well as the summary that he shared to you all.
Go ahead, Attorney Jordan.
Thanks, Mayor, Commissioners. Yeah, this came up. I think we were touching on it tangentially with the discussion regarding the regional sports complex. And the main thing to be aware of is that public money, funds, time, resources cannot be used to solicit support or oppose any ballot issue. So it was just more of a, an advisory that as we step through this process and potentially look to float a bond issue relative to the regional sports complex, that the commission staff, expressing support for floating the bond is different than supporting the passage of that bond, and being respectful of that boundary when we engage in those discussions with the proponents of that the commission can support, although cannot commit a future commission to float a bond. Definitely can't use city resources to promote the passage of that bond. We can provide information as to what might happen if it does pass or doesn't pass, but we're limited in not using any public funds to support that. And so I think mainly this is just education for the commission, education for the community where the authority lies, so we don't step into any issues with regard to that.
Thank you. Good information there, Mr. Jordan. Madam Howell-Schulk?
Thank you, Mayor and Commission. I now would like to move us into the general fund savings and spending, and then after we're done with that, I do have just a couple more updates that have come up in the last several days. They're just verbal, that will also be put onto future agendas that I want to make sure and close the loop on with you all. I want to be able to, if I can, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to you all. And this is the summary of the submittals you individually provided to me on how we could be spending the general fund savings that was arrived at as a result of reimbursements by the state of Montana through response to CARES Act, or excuse me, the response to COVID-19. And what is interesting with this, this is the first time we could, and you all had a chance to really use the Balancing Act tool. And as has been discussed before, it's really a good polling tool, and it helps share to the community and those who are engaged with it how budget items are addressed, or what items they might be most interested in funding. So what you had was an opportunity to share to me your thoughts on items that had come up previously and throughout, in alignment with your newly created strategic outcomes for our budget. And this conversation was delayed from November, and in respect to holding your strategic planning retreat and making sure that when we look to funding and using these dollars, that we place them into those items that respond to the priorities you have all set. Based on your input, I'll go through those in a moment, but I also want to point out that we, as you know, have received and will be receiving, have not received yet, but will be receiving new federal dollars as a result of the recent passing American Recovery Plan by the President and Congress. Those dollars will be different in their methodology, in that they will come straight to the city. And in the past round within the CARES Act, those dollars were managed by the state and we were reimbursed by the state. So the state held the burden of compliance assurance. And when we receive these new dollars, we will hold the burden of compliance assurance. So I want to make sure and point that out, because it's very different than this conversation we're having here, because these are general fund savings. They are not federal dollars. There's far more flexibility with these dollars because they are our general fund dollars.
Right.
So just to make that point as well. So based on your responses, and I'll show to you as well how the distribution of the responses, but I just wanted to show to you how the summary comes into us through the Balancing Act. So that underneath your promote healthy and sustainable growth, the greatest interest was within the downtown redevelopment and placing funds into the downtown redevelopment work. And then you can also see the comments that were provided by commissioners as they made submittals on this item. As you know, the submittal itself had a particular dollar amount. So in moving over to, just want to make sure that my screen share is correct. So I'm going to share another screen so you can see how it plays out on the actual balancing act tool. What I have done is I have filled already the tool with the top responses you have all provided within each of the areas and the balance of those dollars left. I'll go back to the Word document so you can see the comments and see the numbers. Basically, it was anything that received 50% or greater. I placed into here as a priority 50% or greater because there were distributions that resulted in 25% in several places. So I just wanted to make sure you knew how I was pulling out the top items. But what's most interesting is that those top items of 50% or greater result in us spending all of the savings. I'm going to go back to the Word document. So moving on to, so just to make sure you have a chance to review the comments, you noted, I'm not sure we need $100,000 for the Rural Development Agency if structured to oversee the existing urban renewal districts. The RDA should have annual revenue for more than $500,000 in the near term. I see this dollar amount as a placeholder. Also would need more information on what the $100,000 for the Downtown Redevelopment Agency is for. What would that use be? And should the city consider using a portion of the new dollars, which I was just talking about, those federal dollars, to support businesses impacted by COVID and partner with them back? Great question. Yes, we should be looking at those new dollars that were identified by the that are identified in the federal turn to the businesses. I will come back to the statement I made earlier, which is the flexibility. Right. When we distribute those new federal dollars to the business and to MBAC, we become responsible for ensuring that MBAC meets the requirements of spending, as opposed to if we were to give them these more flexible general fund dollars. The expectation on the turn and the even the communication becomes different because it's far less restrictive, even though we don't have really the information from the U.S. Treasury on those new dollars and what will be expected to do. As I understand it to be even far less cumbersome. So next, are there any questions on what I've shared so far related to promoting healthy and sustainable growth, or the tool, or anything I've shared before I move on to the next item, which is improving neighborhood livability? Okay. Moving on to neighborhood livability. So the highest response in this area was to the purchase of irrigation wells, and then funding the waste. Then you can see the 25% were below. So I did in fact move those dollars over into the tool. So you can see again, I'm going to stop and share what that summary looks like. Neighborhood livability, the urban parks, since it received 50% or greater, received $80,000. Just a couple of the comments from that. I hope I'm not making you sick driving back and forth in the shares. The waste strategic plan and attendant actions should be paid out of the respected solid waste funds rather than the general fund. Irrigation wells should be considered in the 2021 stimulus funds for water sewer projects. The ADA transition plan should be funded, but potentially not at the $1 million number. Further, without seeing the specific ADA transition plan breakdown, it is not clear that the $1 million from the general fund is appropriate. Many improvements are likely required at facilities that are funded by rent, City County Building, Law and Justice Center, and the cost should be built into the rent schedules. Likewise, enterprise fund buildings or special revenue fund buildings should be paying through rates. There needs to be more information and discussion before committing $1 million from the general fund outright. Likewise, 9th Street seems a candidate for debt servicing rather than an immediate cash expenditure and should be addressed for whether it can be funded from the enterprise fund. And then the last comment here is would like to see more detail on the ADA plan. Open to using a portion of these funds, but more detail would be helpful. I wanted to, on that first comment, respond to one point, and that was around further discussion on depending and further outright on that ADA plan and its breakdown, I believe is the point there. And certainly it did not receive the highest burden of funding from you all, so I wouldn't say that it's a recommendation for funding either way at this point. But the ADA transition plan is definitely something that we can bring back for further discussion if it sounds like it might actually be of great benefit to all of you.
Well, maybe just for the manager, I mean, one thing for me that would be helpful with the ADA is we have an obligation to fund that ADA plan. Billings messed theirs up a few years ago, and now they're in a consent judgment, I think, with DOJ to get things done. I know when we did our ADA transition, we had a breakdown of the respective facilities, whether they were in enterprise funds, whether they were general government, and I think there was some general sketch out of a potential schedule. I don't know that we've done anything since then to actually fund that schedule explicitly, or at least we haven't had a discussion of it. It could be happening behind the scenes in the capital plan. So even just looking at those year-over-year numbers would be helpful to understand, because even if it's a low priority for some or all of us, it's a mandatory action for this commission to take at some point, irrespective whether we want to bury our heads in the sand. I think the question is the best structure to do those funds at this point, because it's not a if we do it, it's just a when and how.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's an excellent question. We'll make sure. Also, I've made a note to draw that out in our FY22 capital plan improvements so that that's more clear as it comes forward as part of the preliminary budget submittal that I provide to you all. And I'm not sure if if Director Hogan is on from Community Development, but I believe that would be her thoughts as well, just to be in alignment with that those facilities that fall into particular funds would need to pay for those improvements as well.
Mr. Mayor, did City Manager want me to respond? There is an ADA transition plan. I will send that link to both the manager and to the mayor and commission, so you can all see it. It's on our website. So that did outline improvements in not only our buildings, but also our parks. And there was also, I think, some discussion of transit and services such as how we provide services to our employees. As to your direct question about the use of enterprise funds, that was not part of the scope of that transition plan, and that certainly would be something that we would have to talk about as a leadership team on how to fund it. But thirdly, we have been asking and have been getting updates from each of the different departments on how they've addressed those ADA, or if they've done anything. I apologize, you should have had my video on. And this is Sharon Hogan, Community Development Director. How they've done those updates, we could also provide the commission with those last two updates when we send the link to the plan. I don't know if that helps or answers anybody's questions.
Can I ask a clarifying question really quick, Mayor, and that of Director Hogan is the, with regard to the $1 million that is on this list, is this the implementation of general fund property-specific improvements that have not been completed?
I would think it was the overall improvement, just setting aside to address ADA deficiencies in parks, buildings, and I don't know that it even touches all the transportation. But $1 million was just suggested as a good place to start because the needs in the plan are great. I was trying to look at the overall schedule, but I don't think there was a distinction between enterprise and general fund. $1 million, but I'd have to go back and look at the plan. And since the plan was done, we've also acquired the Law and Justice Center. So that I don't know has gone to complete analysis either. So that would be an additional building added to that. So I could answer those questions once you had an opportunity to further research the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hagen.
Okay. We'll go back to the Balancing Act tool. So we're down to now the promote a safe community, and wanted to share to you the 3 items that were noted as being in the higher ranking, and sharing over to that screen that has your results that include details. Sorry, I'm trying to move the screen so you can get the comment. The forcible entry prop seems more appropriate for the fire service levy allocations. Is the update actually expected to cost this amount, or is this just a placeholder? To the extent the city is going to engage with other entities in the study, contributions should be sought from others, even if the city funds the predominant amount. And I believe I would need to have, to answer this question, Fire Chief Wood, is this cost a placeholder, or I believe that's the question around the fire service, the use of the forcible entry prop.
Wood, you have
City Manager, Mayor, Commission, the cost is what the actual cost would be to purchase the forcible entry prop. I don't, what exactly, I guess, is the...
It's an $8,000 purchase. Is this something that can be paid for out of the fire service levy allocation?
Oh, yes, it can be.
Okay. Okay. And then there are 2 more sections: operating losses, and then government operations. Under the operating losses, due to COVID, the primary focus here was on revenue losses. And with the new federal dollars that are coming down, now we have the opportunity to use them to gap the revenue losses. Most of the losses in conversations with the other Montana cities have been in revenues related to recreation and outdoor activities. So it's not a surprise that the activities noted here as having losses are those that are also pretty common across Montana as well. Those losses, some of which might be lower since these were put together as projections. For example, some of the parking equipment might have changed as far as its operating losses as well. But in shifting back over to the list, you'll see again in the tool the distribution of the operating losses and where those funds would be used to be covered. Okay, and then last is our government, oops, sorry. Last is our, the comments on those operating losses. I'm going to read them out loud here. These should be allocated to new stimulus dollars, which appear to allow lost revenue backfill, which we can do. And this should be considered as, yes, under the new federal funds. So I agree. And when we put this together, we did not know that we could be using those dollars. I'm not sure, there's no time frame that's been established for when operating losses could be used to cover. So I just want to make sure that you all know that as soon as we get the dollars from the federal government, which we understand will come in 2 allocations, we would then need to verify the U.S. Treasury's restrictions that they will put onto them in the past round. And I understand that this is not the case with this round, but in the CARES Act round, there were restrictions based on date of spending and date of incurrence. And I suspect that won't be the case here because the operating losses occurred all within the pandemic. So I just agree with that as well. And last, government operations. This one, you'll see the greatest response was in revising and updating the city's 20-year-old budget and finance software. And that's it for this area in particular. And so I'll go back to the tool.
So there's that comment. Is it really going to cost that much, Madam Manager?
Excellent question. Yes. And the second question is the same one, really. This seems like a lot of money, and I would like to hear more about this. Yes, it is. I had the team put together some screenshots for me so you can see what it's like for us, because I don't think when we say it's 20 years old and it's green screen, I think there might be this suspicion that we're exaggerating. So I really want you to see what the team experiences when they're trying to pull information for us. And I think it's really important for you to feel some of the views and the function-based Shift F1 type environment they're still living in when they're doing any of their financial work. Now, these exports that we have to do are filled by individuals. So when you see the word query, that's an export. So they'll do a query for particular items, which is exported, and then it goes into Excel. And then staff are doing hand entry, which are then translated into further documentation. So is that common for even current systems? Yes. However, in current systems, they do not, you can actually navigate some sort of higher level tool system. This is not the case here. We also are stuck in a very much paper system. I wish I had taken a picture of a Friday afternoon when all of the timesheets were on the table or on the desk of the staff member who has to hand enter all of the paper timesheets. So the systems would not only improve our financials, but they would also improve our personnel systems in many ways that feed those financials. Right now, we are hand entering and communicating across 2 different types of data sets to come to an answer. This plays out, as you've heard me discuss the annual audit and some of the frustrations and information of hand entry that we're experiencing that cannot be repeated many times, even in how it has been done in the past. So my hope, and yes, it is 1.5 million because basically we're coming from 1995 in my summary statement here, 1995 to the year 2021 with regard to the financial needs, the type of software that we need. We just don't have that agility. Thank you. So in all, we get to this final recommendation based on all of your input. We end up with around 350,000. I can go back to the larger items. As shared before, the general fund spending in this conversation is adopted already within the budget, and these are opportunities at the end. I agree with the commission that we should, especially with regard to operating losses, look to addressing and using those federal dollars to cover them, and the new federal dollars to cover them, and then move the dollars to other priorities. There was one that was additionally submitted that was brought up, and certainly we can talk more here if you'd like about other ideas, or if you would like to just continue to move forward with the ones that we've got and infusing additional funds in any further way. It's up to you as to how you'd like to move forward. But we've, in essence, you've given me enough flexibility to take the last $350,000 and infuse them and then move those operating dollars. And I have a pretty good sense of your priorities based on your individual submittals.
Mayor, may I ask a quick question?
Please go ahead, Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Thank you, Mayor. So I know that there was some discussion in the fall about, you know, the impact of having these additional funds, freeing up the general fund dollars and sort of reaching a cap of how much we can really have in our general fund. And I can't remember what that amount is. So I guess just one question to you and the budget folks, with what you are recommending to us today, and I can't remember what that total amount is now, if you take out the revenue recovery portions, does that get us to a place where we're comfortable, we're meeting sort of requirements of not exceeding a certain amount in our general fund, and then potentially can use those funds in our future budget cycle?
Thank you, Commissioner O'Loughlin. Director Danielson, I believe it's on. I'd like to turn it over to her.
Thank you, City Manager Harlow Shock, Mayor and Commissioners. Sheila Danielson, Finance Director. In regards to the question as to what is the limit, it is my understanding that it is 50. We can have a fund balance carryover in our general fund of 50% of our annual appropriations. We're still at this point, I have been reviewing that with Chris Cooey, our budget analyst, on where we're going to end up at the fiscal year end. And in order to be able to give you an answer to that, I do need to wrap up fiscal 20 and see where we're going to end up in order to understand if we're going to meet that compliance issue or not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Please go ahead, Madam Hollishock.
Thank you. The consensus then would be moving forward with the 75% and greater, and then all of the other items, leaving around 1.4 million. If you're in agreement, we'll come back to this concern. We're both, Sheila and I, Director Danielson, watching out for this compliance, and really excited to finish the annual audit so that we can come to the revenue and get to the next piece, which is submitting a preliminary budget to you all. But at this point, wanted to go ahead and get your consensus of moving forward with the Housing Trust Fund, $1 million, $100,000 over to MBAC, and evaluating if in fact we need to. The Downtown Redevelopment Agency and ensuring that those funds go over to it and seeding it in many ways. Urban Irrigation Fund, or Urban Parks Irrigation Well Investments. Police Department, mobile data computer docks, purchasing a forcible entry prop, and updating the 2006-2008 fire service studies. And then last, upgrading the city's 20-year-old budgeting and finance software.
Will and pleasure of the commission.
Can I just ask a quick clarifying question?
Go ahead, Commissioner Dean.
For Manager Hollishock, you were saying moving ahead with those that had 75% or greater, or 50% or greater?
50.
Thank you, Commissioner Dean. I had put 50% or greater into the tool itself. because that was the greatest burden of the dollar. Then the 75% or greater was the only one. There was only one of those, and that was really the urban redevelopment agency. So that's why I filled the rest with a 50% or greater. And this results, I'll bring up the screen again, which results in this total here as seen.
Perfect. Yep, that's helpful. One more comment, Mr. Mayor. I'm comfortable with that. And I guess I just ask, what is the timeline or process moving forward? And full transparency, I think Manager Holoshuk mentioned this. I was breaking the rules a little bit and or not following the full calculator, but there are a few items I know that I was interested in, different amounts or items that weren't necessarily on the list, but I think should be considered. And so I'm just wondering what that timeline would look like, of when would be an appropriate time to talk about those.
That's a great question. I think when we come back to answering Commissioner O'Loughlin's question might be the right time.
Great.
But I think you should also consider sharing with the commissioners what your additional items are that you have brought forward. I'm sure there's others that the commissioners might also have as well that we should also keep track of, so that when we come back with the balance review at the end and after having completed the audit, we can revisit those new ones.
Great. Yeah, happy to do so.
And, any given year when we're going to do an expenditure out of the general fund as a commission, the budgetary process is where we would discuss those. Obviously, getting them in the hopper for discussion sooner rather than later makes it so that we're not here till 11 o'clock at night on the final budget passage, trying to figure out if it fits into the general fund. But it seemed to me that the question we're answering goes back to Commissioner O'Loughlin's: do we need to get some of this money actually spent in order to comply with state law? I would still urge us to take a look at some of those other, even if they're smaller items, the forcible entry prop, the irrigation wells. There's no reason to spend unrestricted general fund dollars on items that can be spent out of restricted funds, right. Either 21 stimulus or an enterprise fund that should be funding it. We should spend it to make sure we don't hit that penalty, and then we should have discussions on other discretionary funding as well. The other day at the non-motorized meeting, we discussed some of the areas that we can't fund, say, out of transportation, like finishing paving the Centennial Trail. Knock on wood, we finally get the easement done, or the space behind the transfer station. So there's lots of other possibilities that would be discussed through the budget process that hopefully we'll all bring to each other. But I would encourage us to back away from spending this money on if there's another place we can spend it out of that's restricted, so that there's as much freedom as possible with the remaining general fund dollars if they're going to be spent.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, and Mayor, I would just say I'm comfortable with the city manager moving forward. I think that she's done a really good job of sort of taking, what she's hearing from the community, what she's hearing from the commission, and moving forward with this list as she's presented it. I think that if we need to come back and look at other items in order to sort of meet that capped amount, I think that makes a lot of sense. Alternatively, if that's not the case, I think we're sitting in a really good place, both with these excess general funds, as well as the federal dollars that are now going to be coming into the city, to potentially sort of think about this in the context of our next budget process. So if there are other ideas, this money doesn't just go away, right? Like anything that's in excess, we have into our next budget process that we can really think about what are those one-time projects that we want to consider, and also maybe leverage the additional federal funds that we're accessing. I'll just say, I think there's a couple things in here that I wish we could move forward funding, but I'm comfortable with this list as, I think a good summation of what are the priorities of the commission and of the community that are bubbling up. So I'm comfortable moving forward as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other final comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner.
I would just say I'm comfortable as well.
Okay, thanks, one and all. Madam Hollishaw? Oh, there you are. I see it's unanimous that we're comfortable with moving forward with those items.
Terrific. Thank you all. I'll also thank you, Commission and Mayor. I just want to close off with a couple of items that have come up the last several days, and then we can move off of the city manager item. I appreciate your patience. The team is looking at moving to hybrid in the chambers for the commission meetings in April, and I know that the team with our city clerk as well as IT and facilities team are working together, and we'll be providing to you some updates on how this would work to not only provide online, but also public access. And the team would continue to provide more access in the room and leave seats open for the public, instead would dial in. I have been, just wanted to make sure you know that I have been meeting with executive directors that have come on at the state level, both at the Montana Department of Transportation and in the Department of Commerce. Two reasons being, first, they're obviously new and I have not met them, but also clearly we work with them tremendously, and was very excited for the opportunity to hear from the executive director of the Department of Transportation their interest in greater partnership, and share to them our interest in also seeing them move more toward greater burden of our own spending of those dollars as opposed to the state doing the work inside. So I'm curious how that conversation will develop. This is a larger discussion I've been having with many of the city managers across the state who feel the same way, as well as their public works directors. The same with the Department of Commerce. I will be sharing a note out to all of the city managers that I'm in communications with. And as you know, we've been working on this video project where we're in essence sharing, welcome to Helena. While you're here, these are the kinds of things as a business that it's really an economic development type video. Commerce is interested in that same type of messaging, and we're actually in line with what they have. So there's opportunity for the city to potentially fund out of their dollars some of our economic development needs, which having these conversations with you all around the types of things you want to see increases our opportunity. Brian Obert at MBAC was with me in those conversations. And of course, he is a part of a larger conversation as our regional representative. He isn't the economic developer for the city, but he's aware of what we're doing, and I'm really excited. I also met with their business analysis team at Commerce, who is doing some economic development evaluations. I've suggested to them a couple of ideas and said, prove me wrong, and which is exciting because that's really their expertise, and being able to use that at the state level for free, and as well as their demographics data, which will be available to us through the Census 2020 publishing at the end of this month, will be of huge leverage for the city of Helena. Two more updates. The airport. I wanted to make sure you all have been reached to. I know that you all have been reached to by the airport around the reauthorization of it. It is up for reauthorization at the end of June. I wanted to let you know that we as a staff team have really been evaluating 5 items, and the reauthorization is one of them. And we are planning to bring a full conversation back to you as part of the April 14th administrative meeting. Those 5 items are not only the reauthorization, but also the lack of assessment payments, FAA funding that's received by the airport and its relationship to their lack of assessment payments, the Youth Soccer Association and a shared lease that they have with the city, and then our operations on site, which include the police department's patrol services. So I wanted to make sure you know that the conversation is really not just the reauthorization, but really 5 parts that have come up in the last several months that we want to make sure that you're aware of, that we're analyzing thoroughly and bringing to you good, thoughtful recommendations on next best steps for the reauthorization. Do you have any questions for me on any of those items so far? And I just have 2 more items. That's it.
You have 2 more?
I do. I just said 2, and I have another one that just came in. I'm sorry. These little notes. I don't want to lose the opportunity to talk to you all.
Okay, comments or questions for Ms. Hollishaw? Madam Hollishaw? Please continue.
Okay. 2, 3 commission meetings prior, I shared to you that we were in conversations with a loan that had been opened up for the with the Artisan Group LLC, and potential options in aligning their loans, their loan and their loan payments. I wanted to let you know that they have restarted their loan payments as originally decided upon, and have come up to speed on their payments. So appreciate the efforts of that business to move forward with us in those efforts. So just wanted to close that loop, that they are on time and on schedule. And just the last, please know that we are looking into a blog or some other mechanism that will allow you to post questions that you might have for the staff. In particular, I know that there are several times when you all reach to the directors or to the staff without my involvement. And while I know I've asked that we not do that, and I know the mayor suggested and supported that as well, I know it's very difficult because you just need the question asked. And so please continue not to contact the staff directly. Please continue to go through me, but I'm also working with the team to look at a different mechanism so that you can post your questions, everyone can see it, and then we can respond. And you don't have to worry about making sure that I am included, that I will have the ability to see it all. That's it. That's my last item, Mayor. Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Hollishaw. Any comments or questions for Madam Hollishaw? Do we have any public comments? Thank you. Department items needing directions, feedback. Director Leland? Or is it Ms. Jamie Clark?
Oh, Mayor Commission, sorry, just had a little technical difficulty in here. I'd like to give a brief overview of the master plan that was recently completed by AE2S, the city's consultant, and staff Jamie Clark. Some of the items that we'll be looking at with the master plan, or the master plan looked at, was expanding or the existing system. What do we need? Where our deficiencies are? What do we need to do to bring it up to current standards? Where do we need additional storage? And then expansion, annexation of the city, moving out into the county, the west side, new subdivisions. And then we'll also look in the future to get potential conversations with the commission and consensus is how do we want to expand out in the city? Do we want to look at a water and sewer district where we provide water supply or overall systems to existing subdivisions that are having problems, to new subdivisions that are in the county not coming into the city because they're the proximity to the overall distance from the city boundaries. And then the staff will continue to expand the groundwater system and how it supplies as a supplemental supply to the system. We have substantial rights that are out there, and then that have great potential that we could actually take the supply and go out to an existing subdivision that has problems with water supply. And is that something we want to look at and be able to expand into that area? So those are some of the things that we'll have to look at into the future. The county planning, the ZAP committee is a hot topic on that as far as the city expansion. Do we supply the water or without annexation or not? So that's going to be a long, in-depth conversation that we have. But this master plan sets the ground rules, looks at the nuts and bolts of it, And then we will be looking at consensus on the capital plan. It looked at the capital plan for expanding. What do we need to be able to expand? What size of mains and water tanks, where they need to be located, and then also the master plan for, or the capital plan for the existing systems. Where do we have undersized mains? Where can we not provide adequate fire flow? Where do we need to improve our system for not having to pump so much, energy costs, and issues like that. So with that, there's a brief overview that we can get into conversations with, but I will turn it over to Jamie Clark, and then he will turn it over to our consultant.
Go ahead, Mr. Clark.
Hi, Mayor and Commission. We hired AE2S about 1.5 years ago, engineering consultant, to do a comprehensive master plan and capital improvement planning report for the water distribution and storage system, which they completed, and they'd like to present the executive summary and maybe answer some questions you might have today. As part of the process, we did a risk assessment on the overall system. We did analysis of fire flows, comprehensive fire hydrant testing program, and I'll just let the consultant take it from here and summarize the results of that. And with that, I'll hand it over to Nate Weisenberger. He's an engineer with AE2S Consultants. Thank you.
Nate, we can hear you loud and clear now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Thank you, Mr. Leland, Mayor Collins, and members of the City Commission. It was definitely a pleasure to work with the city on this project, this planning project for the storage and distribution system. We also considered some water rights for the sources of water that you rely on as well. Apologize if you cannot see my face. I don't know if my video is showing, and I do have a presentation available if you'd like for me to share my screen. Otherwise, I can.
I apologize, Mayor and Commission. I've promoted Mr. Weisberger to a panelist so he can use the AV. So give him just a moment.
So you should all be seeing the presentation that I have here. Please let me know if you cannot. But as Mr. Leland and as we get going here, I just wanted to go through what we're. I'm having some technical difficulties. I apologize. For some reason, this slide deck has a mind of its own. But what I would like to talk about here is this is an overview of the Helena water system. And so as you see the map in front of you, the different colors represent zones of pressure of the system. You can also visualize where the sources of water come from. As Mr. Leland mentioned, we do have the Eureka well, which is located up in the kind of in the upper Hale area of your system in the southern central portion of kind of in the hillside. We also have the 10-mile water treatment facility and the Missouri water treatment, the Missouri River water treatment facility. And so in understanding how the system works, you have during most of the time, you have water coming down from 10-mile water treatment plant under unpumped conditions. During peak periods of time, you have water coming from the Missouri River plant as well, which has to be pumped into the system. So maximizing the use of the 10-mile plant definitely is an objective of the study. You can see where the water storage facilities are located by the red circles. They're located primarily on the upper elevations of the city on the south side. And then gravity is used to move the water up to the north as you transition into the lower Melvin zone indicated by the darker pink color. As we worked with the city to identify some objectives, you heard from Mr. Leland about some of the things that we wanted to look at. Definitely, we were concerned about the number of undersized mains that are present in the system. There are currently about 80 miles of pipe in the system that are under 6-inch or 6-inch diameter or less. Typical good size for a water main is 8 inches. So that was one of the objectives we had to evaluate. Currently, about 60% of your distribution system operates at a pressure of 100 psi, which is relatively high. So we looked at ways to mitigate high operating pressures. So there were some concerns about turning over the water in your storage tanks on that south side of that higher elevation area of the city, specifically with one of the tanks. So we looked at some optimization of set points on how to operate the tank. And then it's not uncommon for cities in the United States to have issues with aging pipelines. And about 40% of the pipes are about 50 years old, and about 15% are over 75 years old. So those are some of the things that we looked at with respect to the risk assessment, which Mr. Clark mentioned in turning over the control to me. When we look at the community, we consulted with the planning department and obtained some information about how the community will grow. So evaluating that with respect to where the water is, where it needs to go, both currently and into the future. And so as we looked at population projections, there's a modest population growth that we were looking at. Current population, or I guess in 2017, was about just over 30,000 people, and we're looking at just shy of 33,000 people by 2040 based on population projections. What that means graphically, so here's another map of the city. Mr. Leland mentioned some growth areas on the west side and north side of the community, very much adjacent to where your existing distribution system is. And then on the east side, you can see there's a zone of area that we looked at for potential growth in the near term as well. Long term, of course, there was some consideration looking extended north into the Central Valley and North Valley of the area north of the city. We took a very hard look at how water is used in the system and how much water is used. And so we call this water use and demand forecasting. Some would call it water characterization. You can see by the chart here that looks like a blue sawtooth. That demonstrates how much water on a monthly basis is used by the community. What's interesting about that graphic is it's fairly consistent from year to year. What you'll see in most of the time with any fluctuation is that the peak demand will typically be heightened if you have a dry year or a drought condition, and that's typically the trend we saw here. The chart underneath that with the blue and green bars, you can see how much the average day demand varies from the peak day demand. Again, not a whole lot of variability on the top end, where you have 15 to 15.2 million gallons per day of water use with an average of about 6 to maybe 5 MGD on an average day basis. The nice thing about that trend on the blue is that it indicates that the city is reducing the amount of water that's being used through some conservation and some fixing of water main and various things like that. So you're seeing, despite maybe some growth in the community, consistent water use, which is a nice trend to see from a water system perspective. You can see how the water varies with respect to monthly use throughout the years. Typically, you're a very typical system for a northern climate, so relatively low demands in the winter months. The shoulder seasons, you'll start to see a little bit of a pickup of demand with your peak demands occurring in July and August. A very typical curve for that. The interesting thing to note about Helena, with all of the institutional usage, you're about 40% commercial, which is a little bit higher than most communities. But with respect to how the water is used, Roughly 60% is associated with residential use, and that 40%, of course, for commercial, which is also represented by your institutional use as well. What it means with respect to seeing that population growth along with the water demand is then we use the two pieces of information to project what the water use would be in the future. And so as we look at that, your average day demand by 2040, based on some of the good work on conservation and shoring up some of the leakage in the system, you'll probably have an average day demand of about 6 MGD by 2040, and a maximum day demand somewhere in the neighborhood of 16.5 MGD, which is about a 1 to 1.2 MGD above where you're at now in the lower to mid 15s. As we evaluate the water distribution system, we develop a digital model of your water system, and that's we use a software to do that. And in order to replicate what the system is actually doing, we calibrate that model. We actually were out in the field in your system. We conducted a series of hydrant flow tests. We had pressure recorders on hydrants to measure the pressure in terms of how the distribution system responded to stressing the system by opening up those hydrants. And what we're able to do is we're able to graphically measure how your system is performing and compare that to the information that you have available from your SCADA system, or the data that your operators use on a day-to-day basis to visualize and see how the system is performing. The really cool thing about what I'll say about the calibration effort is that when we got the calibration done, we had some issues in some certain spots, and what that usually signifies is there might be a closed valve in the system. And so we asked your staff if they would go out into a specific intersection and check for a closed valve, and indeed there were some of those. So when you consider how well the model is calibrated, when we can find closed valves in the system, that's always a good sign that we have a very well calibrated model that accurately reflects your system. So as we used that model to evaluate your system, we talked about the pressure zone situation. So when you look at that map that I showed you of your existing system, where there was maybe a couple colors in the northern or the central to northern part of the city, what we did was we looked at dividing a couple of the larger zones into separate zones. So when we had that middle zone, we divided that one up into two. So you have kind of a peach and a brown color that transitions into that kind of that darker red and into the purple. We looked at dividing those up, and then what that does is it allows you to operate your distribution system at lower pressures, which then reduces the potential for high pressures to cause leaks or cause excessive water loss in your system. So that was one of the things we evaluated. We also looked at, with respect to that storage reservoir, the Woolston tank, and how all of the tanks work in combination together, both with the well that you have, the 10-mile water treatment plant and the Missouri River plant, how those tanks are performing if you're deficient in storage for any reason. And we identified some ways that the storage that you have could be optimized in the short term. And we also looked at adding some storage in the longer term in the Reader's Village area up in the Hale zone where the Eureka well is. And then we looked at adding, as those zones could potentially be divided into 3 or 4 zones, and having all of your storage up on the upper elevations. We looked at placing a new storage facility kind of in the area of Centennial Park or in the golf course area with Bill Roberts Golf Course. And so that would be a much longer term improvement for the city to consider, however. It was mentioned about our fire flow analysis. So what we did was we looked at both in terms of the current system configuration and the new pressure zone configuration, how well your hydrants are performing in the system, and basically identified here with some of the red circles or dots on this map where some of the pressure problems are when you stress the system with respect to fire flow. So a lot of the improvements that we recommended were intended to address some of the poorer or the deficient areas with respect to the fire flow, both now and if the city were to consider some additional zones to manage pressures in the system. Mr. Clark mentioned the risk assessment, and risk assessment basically means if you consider your distribution system, you could look at several factors of the water system. When was the pipe installed originally? What kind of pipe is it? Is it ductile iron, cast iron, PVC? You know, some of those materials just experience natural corrosion and maybe have a reduced service life based on just historical data across the individual system or nationwide in general. You could also look at whether that specific area of the distribution serves a critical asset, such as a hospital or a school, or some of those things. And what we did was we used your geographical information system data along with some of the hydraulic model results that we have with that calibrated model. And what we did was we identified how much the individual segments of water main, what is the risk of failure, what is the consequence of failure, and if a specific piece of pipe had a high risk of failure but also a high consequence, it got into that level 5, which is a major concern. If it was a moderate in one and maybe high in the other, it would be considered a level 4 and a level 3. And the city gave us a lot of really good criteria to use to make those, to use weighted criteria to evaluate that. And you can see basically how much of your system falls into those various categories of, maybe higher risk, higher consequence, and those that are definitely needing to be prioritized higher on the capital improvement plan moving forward. So when we talk about risk assessment, that's a summary of the work that we did. And so what it all boils down to is taking that information for the storage, for the distribution system and risk, identifying areas that should be improved, whether that's water main replacement or some tank improvements. And so we identified short-term improvements with respect to the storage and distribution system. And then we balanced those improvements against the financial capacity that's typically spent on an annual basis, and developed kind of a prioritized list. And then based on that prioritization, a year that those improvements could potentially be completed by the city. And then we also did a longer term, so basically in the out years of 2027 to maybe 2030 and 2040, what types of improvements would be. And the way that we devised this system of risk assessment and prioritization of assets is every year the city could review the work that was done. You can take leak history from the prior year. You can take other data, insert it into that risk model, and then kind of reshuffle the deck, if you will, and spit out new results in terms of what should be the priority for the upcoming year. So you can constantly be evaluating the best economical spend for your distribution system and storage system for capital improvements in the future. So in summary, we definitely appreciate the opportunity to be of service to the City of Helena. Look forward to how this master plan unfolds and works for the city moving forward. I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Leland.
Thank you, Nate. A couple other points that I'd just like to point out there is when we showed the fire flows that are out there, we do have some sections of town that are under what we are considering acceptable fire flow. And some of that is the case is that it's not that it is bad, it is just our current standards, and a lot of the area was developed with other standards. I mean, it used to be 1,000 gallons a minute. Sometimes it was 400 gallons a minute, and then we are now looking at our current standard of wanting 1,750. So it's not necessarily apples to apples. There are some older systems that we would just need to bring up to our current standards, and that we have not been neglecting it over the years. It's just standards change as houses improve, bigger areas, more growth. So just wanted to put that into a little bit of context. And then with this master plan is it gives us the priority, and it's one consideration, and probably one of the most considerations that we look at is what do we bring to the budget? So we do the master plan, develop based off these the priorities into the capital plan, then take the capital plan and put it into the budget. And each time looking at what is being able to be spent out there. And then this will lead us to wanting to recommend rates, situations like that. So this is just how we look at the master plan. So we take the master plan, the priorities there, the capital plan, then bring it into the budget and then see where we're at and say we're falling way, way behind and we need to increase our rates so that we can improve some of the aging infrastructure and get some other stuff taken care of. So just wanted to give you a little context on both of those, and we'd all be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Leland. Nate, we can see you now, so that's good. Comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
I really appreciate this presentation here today, and just had a question for Mr. Leland. So what we've seen here today is kind of the executive summary of the master plan. Is there a full report that has been produced, and if so, is it available to the commission and the public?
There is a plan. It is the executive summary. The plan is basically 9 technical memos that are out there that came forward, but I don't know if it's on the website yet, but it will be. And was it provided in the overall document, Jamie, that went on Novus? If not, we will get you the full plan that we have out there.
I'm not sure if it's out to the public, but I have a PDF of it as well as a hard copy. I know the assistant director, Phil, has one as well, hard copy. I'm happy to provide that or put it in a common folder where it can be put on the website, either individual memos or the whole thing as one. I have all those on the engineering server ready to go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Hey, Nate, you had your finger up?
I did. Thank you, Mayor Collins. I just wanted to respond to Commissioner Logan as well. We did make a specific effort. Of course, a lot of those technical documents that Mr. Leland and Mr. Clark mentioned have a lot of, it can be somewhat dry and lengthy to read. And so we did make an effort to condense that information into a graphical document that's maybe 12 pages long that, you know, has a lot of information there that you saw on the presentation with fewer words, so that it is maybe easier to read for your benefit, so you don't have to spend much time grasping the information that I presented today. Appreciate the opportunity to comment, Mayor Collins.
Thank you, Nate. Comments or any other questions?
Mayor, I have one quick question for Director Leland.
Go ahead, Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just curious, and I apologize if you covered this and I missed it, but when is the last time that the City of Helena accessed, TSEP funds or the revolving loan fund, CDBG funds or others for any of our projects, our water sewer projects?
Mayor, Commissioner, one that we have looked at with like TSEP, which we are currently using in the West Side Phase 1 and 2 project that is out there with conjunction with Lewis and Clark County, is TSEP. It's very hard for bigger cities to actually be successful. It's kind of set up towards the rural type and smaller communities that are out there. And it's a large expense that we are seeing, that the city in the past had seen, and we just weren't getting funded. So that is not a huge one that we've gone after, but it is something that we are looking at and hopefully be able to expand on that one. Where we get a bigger bang for our buck, at least in the past, has been like STAG. We have looked at STAG, and which is basically a direct appropriation from the federal constituent or federal representatives. To go forward. We do use SRF pretty much constantly. I mean, the 10-mile transmission main had SRF, both of the treatment plants improvements had SRF. So we do use state revolving fund almost on a yearly basis or every year when we do get a big project. So we're always constantly looking at options to be able to get better funding, to leverage the dollars we get without having to expand the rates. So we can get into specific ones, but we do look at what we do, and TCEP and CBDG get a little tough for the city our size to be able to be competitive.
Okay, and I'm just looking at a list that that they're considering. We don't have anything in front of the state at this point. Okay, because I mean, I think there's a real potential that they actually fund more than they usually do because of the additional federal dollars that are coming in that can be used for water and sewer. I don't know the extent to which if there's something that we can get like queued up and in the pipeline, but I just wonder if that's something worth considering. This has just been a lot of really great information about what the needs are, and the needs are significant. So if we can get something queued up and to the state quickly, I wonder if we could be in the mix for some of that federal funds above what we're going to get separately.
Yeah, Mayor, Commissioner, and that's exactly why we wanted to do the master plan, is that this gives us the basis. Okay. All of those plans, basically, how are we controlling our system? What form is, or what liabilities that we have out there? And it's basically risk assessment and asset management that we're looking at. So I wanted to get this document completed so then we can take it forward to the commission or to the federal government and state government and have a better case to be able to go forward with it. We've done our research. We've put in the time and have a plan to be able to go forward and have a better case to actually get that money. So that was the big one, is get this plan completed. And then, yes, we have needs and we will go after every dollar that we can. And then the other side of things is we needed to get our financial end of things in the city just under control to make sure that we know what we have and what is out there as far as rates and everything when we have the federal government or when we have the grant applications going forward. And now we have a new financial director to bring that into focus and get everything back under control. So those were the two items that why we don't have anything queued up right now, but we will be moving forward to queue up several of the projects that we have out there to look at moving forward.
Thank you, Director Leland and Commissioner O'Loughlin. Any other final comments for Director Leland? Thank you.
Mayor, are we good with the way that the master plan is looking and have consensus with the overall priorities and stuff and just take this plan and move forward? Any other big questions?
I think I'm fine with it. Any other?
Thank you.
Okay. Creative pavement painting. Director Dave Konopky, you have 3 seconds. No, joking.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This program came up after we had received the request last year about the painting of the intersection of Lawrence and Last Chance. And, you know, it went fairly well, but we thought that having a process in place would help everyone through the process so that we could guide them through. I'm going to screen share just an overview of the policy. We researched several programs throughout the nation. This one's actually from Charlotte, North Carolina. It's fairly straightforward. It hits a lot of the issues that we wanted to touch on. So we reached out to them and asked them if we could use their program. They were excited about that and gave us permission to use their plan in any way. So we basically based our draft plan on it. You know, what it does, it outlines the process to submit an application. It gives general timelines of the process. It identifies eligible project types and locations. It has a manual in it to further explain some of the sections here. You know, project types and locations, intersection murals, crosswalk murals, dead end enhancements, and sidewalk murals. What it also does is it does talk about prohibited areas, areas that, additional markings on the pavement would confuse drivers or make it difficult to, see what school zones or other pavement markings. It talks about the approval process. It talks about design requirements, about, what can be in the mural, what cannot, the installation process and how we go about getting that approved and closing the street. It talks about maintenance and repair in North Carolina and Charlotte. The painting in the public right of way becomes property of the city, but they require the applicant, unless they don't want to come back and refresh the painting on when it becomes faded or rubbed off. That can be something that can be discussed. It also has they had a good bunch of frequently asked questions. We went through and there's the application form that just allows them to describe what they're doing, what they want to do, what materials they're going to be using, timelines, maintenance, copyright, traffic management, and so on and so forth. There's also, they have a waiver of rights of artwork placed. So any artwork just gives us a little bit of firmer foothold or understanding of the artwork, and that the artist also understands that it's going to be out there and becomes part of the city. And then it just has a memorandum in it. It also has this temporary infrastructure agreement. So we wanted to bring this forward to the commission for just to see what the commission's thoughts were, if this is something that you would like us to pursue. We've gone through this one, as you can see, and have had and changed some things that are more specific to the city of Helena. There are still some things that we need to discuss if we move forward with a program like this with the city attorney, and some minor details that will probably be more asking bringing this back in front of the commission and ironing out some of the finer details. But in a nutshell, this is what we wanted to get your thoughts on tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Konopky. Comments or questions from the commission?
Mayor, I have a question and a comment.
Go ahead, Commissioner Dean.
First, I'm wondering if we can get a copy of this. I didn't see it linked, so if we can get a copy of it, that would be excellent. And my comment, I'm very excited about this. I think having a process that encourages people to actually start doing these type of art installations would be excellent. I know from the feedback I had gotten, the Holter kids loved doing that project. And I think it's just a great way to really engage all different parts of the community, and something unique that shows different characteristics of what makes Helena. So I love it, and I'm really excited, and thank you for all your work and setting up a process that will encourage folks to take advantage of it.
Thank you, Commissioner Dean. Any other comments from the commission? Okay, Mr. Konopky, Director Konopky, you can continue with that. I think it's a great project. I remember when the kids from the Holter came and did that presentation, and I don't see how it's going to affect anything. So I'm fully in favor of it. And so go ahead and put up the policy and the procedures together.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I will get that emailed out to the commission first thing in the morning, and then we'll start refining some of those details and bring it back to you for your consideration.
You bet. Presentation of financial status of the City of Helena appropriation budget for fiscal year 2021. Director Danielson and/or Budget Analyst Cooey.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. The budget analyst, Christopher Cooey, has been working with the departments to review their annual appropriations as compared to budget. And he has a presentation that was presented to you, and he can share his screen, and I will turn the mic over to him.
Thank you, Director Danielson. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. For the record, I'm Chris Cooey with the Finance Department. And if you remember back just a few weeks ago, we talked about the revenue side of our current fiscal year and how things were going. And so now we'll talk about the expense side. And so does that look okay on your screens? I don't know how wide it is.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we'll start here. So the general theme of tonight that I think I'll make clear up front is that at this point here in the finance office, we are really not concerned as far as appropriation authority goes with fiscal year 21. So from everything that we can see, we don't believe that there will be any issues with anybody staying under budget for this fiscal year. With that being said, there are a few concerns that we are keeping an eye on as far as fund balances. So there are a few funds, as there typically are, that sort of ride the line pretty close to having to keep an eye on their fund balance to make sure it does not go negative. So with that, we'll get started. So with the general fund, as of the time that we put this all together, it was about a 55% of its annual budget expended. And again, no real concerns here, especially given all of the CARES Act savings that exist in fiscal year 21. But if we were to sort of take those out of consideration and sort of make this a normal year for the general fund, we would expect that to come in probably somewhere around the 94% mark for the budget. A couple of things to keep an eye on in here. There is sort of an overage in the water and sewer charges for parks maintenance. That sort of scenario stems from a previous year's payment. So I think either May or June of the previous fiscal year ended up getting paid at the beginning of this fiscal year and not paid. So the budget was in the previous fiscal year. So I don't think it's still going to be an issue for us, but it is sort of an item that was pretty well over budget or on track to be over budget just as a line item. Human resources does also need some assistance from some of the other areas in the general fund. A lot of that stems from the consultant services from CMS prior to the hire of the new HR director. And so that's something we'll keep an eye on and move around as needed. And then one other thing, as we talked about recently as well, the Grand Street Theater had that repair that needed to be addressed. Something that we're probably keeping an eye on in this budget season would be to maybe think about starting to put something towards that to cover any future repairs in that order. But that'll go sort of in line with some of the new reserve policies that we would work on where that money would be stored. Moving on into our special revenue funds, which would be the 200 level funds. This is where your street maintenance and open lands and things like that exist. Currently at about 33% as a group. A lot of that is because some of them are grant based, so they just haven't spent without receiving the funds. With any one fund being the highest at about 66% currently. So again, no concerns here as far as budget authority goes with going over budget. But if we were to consider all capital projects and purchases fulfilled, that would probably be closer to about a 70% number. And again, we expect this group to end somewhere around the 94% to budget through the fiscal year. Some things to keep an eye on in these funds, streets and gas tax, largely budgeted for the Rodney Street reconstruction project. So a lot of those funds likely will not be actually expended in this fiscal year, and we'll end up carrying those budgets forward to the next year. The fire department in the process of securing the loan for the purchase of the new ladder truck. We do expect it to be purchased and paid for in full in this fiscal year in order to save about $67,000 with an upfront payment. And then the one real issue in this group of funds was the stormwater assessment rate. So there was an error in the billing. As you know, assessments go on tax bills. And so there was an error in the billing that resulted in charging out the previous year's rate for stormwater. And it was the only assessment in that biennial set of rates that was actually set to increase from fiscal year 20 to 21. We think that's where the error existed, but it does exist, and the Public Works Director is aware of that miscalculation and that error in billing, and they're adjusting their operations accordingly to account for the reduced revenue projection. Enterprise funds, these would be water, wastewater, solid waste, the golf course, things like that. Currently sitting at about 40%, with the highest single one being the landfill at 65, which is mostly some administrative costs. So again, here, no concerns with anyone going over their budget at the fund level at this point in time. We do expect most of them to end up again somewhere around that 97, maybe 98% to budget, depending on anything else that might come up. Areas to watch, again here, Rodney Street will end up carrying some of that money forward into the next fiscal year, but you will see it still as part of the projection of what we expect to spend in this year so that we don't reallocate that money to something else. Parking and golf, so obviously, you know, we talk about them pretty often. They have managed to keep their expenses under control while dealing with some of their revenue issues during COVID. We're hoping that as business picks up here in the spring, we're going to have some more review and hope that it sort of comes back over the top to rebalance some of those. And so while they may not be at risk of exceeding their authority, their budget authority, we are going to keep an eye on them to make sure that we don't end up with a negative fund balance in some of those funds. Internal service funds. So these would be our sort of insurances, and the fleet, you know, the shop actually falls in here as well. Most of them are either fixed charges and revenues or pass-through charges and revenues. So we don't typically see many issues with those funds, but we will continue to monitor them and make sure that nothing jumps out at us. Debt service funds. This is something that Director Danielson and I have had a conversation about recently, possibly reorganizing the way we have some of these. But the only one, the only real debt service fund that we have at the moment is from the 2017 general obligation parks bonds, and there are no concerns with that one at the moment. Capital outlay funds, so these would be our 440, the general capital, the parks improvement, the TIF districts. TIF districts operate on a case-by-case basis, as you guys just approved some projects from one of the TIF districts, I think just last week or the week before. And so those we never really have any concern with going over the appropriation authority because we give the authority as we go along. Again, the 440 fund, the general capital, no concerns there. Those charges are pretty well set. Even us as the finance department, we had that $150,000 for the upgrades, which, as we found out, was nowhere near close enough to get the system that we were talking about. And so we don't expect to spend money. We have reallocated sort of a different project, but it'll still be way under that number for this fiscal year. The only one that's out there is parks improvement, and not from an authority standpoint, but from a fund balance standpoint. They do have some projects that we need to move around a little bit to make sure that their fund doesn't go negative. The 441 would be this fund. So I'm working with Director Pinozzo and her staff on that to make sure that we rein that one back in and we end this fiscal year in a positive scenario. Some other notable items that are affecting budget would be, again, another clerical error in some of the working documents for the IT&S charges. If you remember back to that conversation from last budget cycle, there was this huge swing because of peer review leaving the county. That was going to create a large swing in the city's direction in IT&S charges. And so we kind of worked together, and it was ultimately going to be about a $30,000 increase when all was said and done instead of 90. Unfortunately, it was sort of double reversed out, and so they gave us a $60,000 break instead of a $30,000 break. So we had to fix that. I talked with Director Danielson, and she talked with Manager Harlow-Schock, and we kind of came up with a plan to say that we would pay it as originally agreed during the budget process. So departments were made aware of that and asked to make sure that they kept an eye on their budgets, knowing that, again, it's a total of $30,000 for the entire city, and so for any one fund, it doesn't have a very large impact on their budget. The windstorm not too long ago did do some widespread damage. We did make a claim into MMIA. Staff's working to repair those damages, but it will ultimately result in about a $10,000 deductible that'll have to be absorbed in one way or another. So we are looking at how to either allocate that or which fund has the ability to absorb the whole thing, however that ends up working out. But it's not expected to be an issue at this point to cover the $10,000 deductible. I believe that is everything in there. There was one other thing that had come up since we put this in, where obviously we have special assessments, right? Street maintenance and landfill monitoring, open lands assessment, things like those that we charge out as the city. And we are no different than any other nonprofit entity where we are exempt from property tax, but not from assessments. So we do have to pay our own assessments between the funds. And this sort of goes back to that copy and paste scenario from the biennial and some of those where we didn't end up catching the new budget amounts for the special assessments that we would have to pay for each of the funds. And so they were just budgeted the same as they were for fiscal year 20. The same fiscal year 21 number was used. The largest one was about $10,000, and it was in an enterprise fund. And I've spoken with that director, and we don't think that it's going to be an issue for them to cover that additional amount in their current budget. And the rest of them ranged anywhere from just a couple $100 to a couple thousand. And again, none of those are expected to create any issues with exceeding budget authority or appropriation authority in this fiscal year. So with that, I'm sure we'll be happy to answer any questions or concerns you may have.
Comments or questions from the commission? If not, public comments? Madam Clerk, do we have any raised hand or written comments?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I have no raised hands and I've received no written comment on this item.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Cooey and Director Danielson.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
And our next item here is information only. You can read that. Read aloud the following items title. Okay, we have the Baressa 2021 allocation. We have first 90 days report and implementation of Commission's 16-month goal for the city manager. Do you have any comments on this? Any question on this, commissioners?
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Commissioner Dane.
I have a question that actually I think kind of relates to the last presentation too. First, I really appreciate, oh, sorry, Red Cross is calling me. I really appreciate the 90-day update from Manager Harlow-Schock. There was a lot of really great information. It was very helpful, and the format was also well organized. On the more or less, well, I guess it is almost to the end of the document where you've done kind of an analysis of our fiscal stability, and that we are not currently fiscally stable. I'm just wondering, what is the timeline? I know that you've laid out a number of items that we need to be doing to get to a point where we are in a good place. And I think an example is from the last presentation, Chris had mentioned the assessments that we weren't calculating that in. So what kind of, I guess, checks and balances, a timeline of putting in these checks and balances so that we can be, I know you mentioned this is like a multi-year thing because we really need to get stuff cleaned up. But what does the timeline look like to make sure that we are in better shape this next year when this comes around?
Thank you, Commissioner Dean. This is definitely, the stability analysis is an eye-opener as it relates to what the significant gaps are, and what we're experiencing with the annual audit really is the most tangible example of how, when there's a lack of information in sharing, and a loss of really institutional knowledge that had never been written down, it translates as well the policies and processes that need to be put into place, and even the budget controls and capital plan. And there's just lots of things that need to be run through you all by way of policy and adopted as well. Our team has a lot of work to do by way of implementation of practices and checks and balances. So it's a 2 to 3 year process. And talking with our director Danielson today, it is a structural. So not only do we have our systems that are outdated, but also these base really activities that need to be completed. So it really is a 2 to 3 year timeline. I'm glad to come back and provide a further summary to you all on how we'll come through that actual project itself and implementation.
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, I think that's, I really appreciate that. I do think, obviously we're talking about the expenditure for the financial software, but I think obviously that this is a much larger issue and we really need to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to get things righted. So I know I would appreciate a larger presentation, and maybe that happens following the audit. I'm not sure what you would suggest, but I know that would be helpful for me as we move forward in what will be, like you said, a 2 to 3 year process. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments or questions from the commission?
Mayor?
Go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
I really appreciate the update that Manager Harlow Chalk gave us. I would like to see, as Commissioner Dean voiced, maybe come back with a little bit more detail on the fiscal stability, and would really appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any public comments? Madam Clerk, raised hands or written comment?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I have no comment on the information only items.
Thank you, Rachel. Do you have your, okay. Review of the future agenda item for next commission meeting. Draft list of topics for City Commission administrative agenda. Do you have any items you want to put forth? I know Commissioner Logan, you already put forth something. Any other items we want to put forth? All right. Is there anyone from the public wishes to address the commission? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, I have no written public comment and no hands raised.
You know, when we ask that question, we're meaning for you to answer us, right? Because the public can't talk until you let him talk.
I understand, Mr. Mayor. At this time, there's no public comment.
All right, thank you. Just before we close, I just want us to send out this shout out to Ryan. He got a bouncing baby girl, healthy and doing great. Ryan, Director Leland, congratulations, and hope the little girl is doing fine. Hurry up and name her. She doesn't have a name yet. Only a guy would do that. Any other final comments from the commission? If not, this meeting is adjourned.